Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into Fallon's Daily Toast. It is 6 o'clock on Friday, and normally Fallon's Daily Toast airs at 7 o'clock on Fridays, but I've decided to move the hour to 6 to not conflict with the Uhuru Solidarity Movement webinars at 7. There's a really good one tonight. Bobby Wittenberg, who is a Marine veteran, will be on talking about why he pays reparations and why it's so important for white people to unite in material solidarity with the African People's Socialist Party and pay reparations, to see to it that they can build economic development, black-led economic development and self-determination in areas that have been just devastated by, gentrification or just white flight or just poverty. I was just in St. Louis, and it was a pretty incredible experience. I, had never been to the Midwest, and it was, it's terrible. It's just awful conditions. These neighborhoods in St. Louis that are just completely devastated and broken, crumbling infrastructure, crumbling housing and water and sewer. It's just a war zone. It really is. It looks like a war zone in parts of St. Louis. And then you go to other parts that are just so bougie and built up and very white. You can see the impact that redlining has had upon these communities. You can see where money didn't flow, where bank loans weren't given, to black families more so than they were to the white families to help maintain and just keep things in order. I don't have a guest on tonight's show, but I do have a great book. This book. This is called Overturning the Culture of Violence, and it is written by Penny Hess. Penny Hess is the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, a national organization that works directly under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. And African People's Solidarity Committee's mission is to build a movement of white people's reparations to the African community. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. We're going live right now on Channel 3 in Somerville Media Center is where I am. It's a beautiful Friday evening, rainy outside. I love it. All the blossoms are coming forth and emerging, and things are appearing to brighten up. I wonder if it has to some degree to do with the fact that more and more white people are waking up to the realization that wealth needs to be returned, stolen wealth needs to be returned to the African poor working class. So anyways, we're live on Facebook. We're also live on Channel 3. So thank you so much for tuning in. This is Fallon's Daily Toast. And as I was saying to the viewers on social media, I've decided to relocate, change the time from 7 to 8. Instead of 7 to 8, Fallon's Daily Toast will now air from 6 to 7, so as not to conflict with the Uhuru Solidarity Movement webinars, which are just beautiful. And so I just want to, I don't want that to conflict. So yes, tonight's show, I'm going to read from this incredible book, Overturning a Culture of Violence, is both deeply challenging and profoundly hopeful. It presents an unrelenting testimony of the almost unimaginable crimes of white society. It takes us from the genocide unleashed against the cosmopolitan, prosperous, and technologically advanced societies that populated the earth prior to Columbus' raid on the Americas, all the way through the current U.S. economic boom based on the genocidal prison rates of African people today. And again, Penny Hess is the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, a national organization that works under the direct leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, of which Chairman Omali Yeshitela is the chair. And I salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela's leadership. I also salute the leadership of Deputy Chair Onizane Yeshitela. What they are doing with the Uhuru House and the Black Power Blueprint, and what the African People's Education and Defense Fund is doing, and Black Star Industries is the most inspiring thing happening today in this country and around the world. So today I'm going to read from this book. Can everyone hear me online there? Does it sound okay? Is it loud enough? I know that in the past it's been a bit quiet, so I just want to make sure. Please comment if you'd prefer that if you can hear me or if I need to turn it up. Great. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. Yes, Virginia, Uhuru, Comrade, Paula. The 2-day convention that was in St. Louis, that people from all around the country, traveled into St. Louis to be at, was really incredible. 2 days of just political education, great speakers like Chairman Omali Yeshitela and Chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, also author of this book, Penny Hess, Chair of Uhuru Solidarity Movement, Jesse Neville. I was under the leadership of Akile Anai, who is the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for Burning Spear Media, and it was just incredible. Everything flowed so well. All the presentations were done it's just so on point. The people behind this movement that are helping to put forward the agenda of the African People's Socialist Party by raising reparations so they can build dual and contending power, so they can build economic development in places that have been just so sabotaged, both politically and economically, by white ruling class and white power. So it's just very important that we return stolen wealth. And you see it a lot. It's hoarded in the white communities here, especially in the New England area. Yeah, thank you so much for tuning into the show. And we're going to start. The foreword is, I believe it was written by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, so we'll start with that, okay? Yes, it was. Perfect. And thanks to the comrade who sent this to me in the mail. Thank you so much. Now I have this, and I also have Uneasy Equilibrium, 2 books that I highly suggest all of you buy. You can buy them directly from the Burning Spear Marketplace online. And I believe it's just theburningspear.com/marketplace. Here we go. A year or so ago, prior to publication of this book, an acquaintance peripherally associated with the African liberation movement, enough to retain some semblance of revolutionary legitimacy, mischievously let me in on a bit of gossip from a contending organization. The story went that a mysterious white woman is the real author of the various books, pamphlets, and articles ascribed to me. Within a movement that is generally permeated with race nationalism, this was a serious charge designed to cause me maximum discomfort, no doubt. Just as with most gossip, no names were mentioned, either of the group from whence the rumor originated, or of the white woman whose genius I was said to have appropriated for my own use. However, I suspect the mystery white woman must be Penny Hess, author of this most important book presently before us. Penny Hess was won to participation in the Uhuru movement under my leadership in 1976. She was one of many North Americans who came to a meeting in St. Petersburg, Florida, to form the African People's Solidarity Committee. 1976. Penny Hess came to the meeting from Louisville, Kentucky. Others came from California, Florida, Alabama, Maine, New York, and various other places. Most of those who participated in that Florida meeting have long since discovered better things to do. Many did so within days of the meeting's ending. For many of the North Americans who initially stepped forward, it seemed that the idea of whites working under the leadership of the African liberation movement was a good concept as long as it was not put into practice. Not only did Penny Hess remain in the group, she has grown tremendously in the process. She has set examples for everyone with her principled political stance. She has set examples for everyone with her principled political stance. She has shown her willingness to abandon the assumptions of imperialism that keep most white people in the world wedded to the imperialist ruling class and the parasitic relationship that whites enjoy at the expense of the peoples of the world. It will not do to argue with any race nationalists, either African or European, that Hess is not the author of my works. Indeed, in such quarters there is an underlying assumption that if there is a relationship between Africans and Europeans, it is the European who leads. It is not an unreasonable assumption. It is generally supported by history. What is unusual is that the African People's Socialist Party, which I lead, has come to certain philosophical conclusions that make it necessary for Penny Hess and the African People's Solidarity Committee to work directly under the party's leadership. These philosophical conclusions are the basis for this work by Penny Hess. It is a work that strips bare many of the most popular radical assumptions within the US and Europe regarding the fundamental underlying cause of oppression in the world. Overturning the Culture of Violence gives flesh to our premise that world capitalism has its basis in and owes its continued existence to slavery, the slave trade, the rape and pillage of the world by Europe and North America. It exposes the political and economic structures put into place by white power to facilitate this parasitic relationship. Hence, this book is not a simple recitation of bad things done by Europeans to others designed to make white people feel bad, as some have claimed upon knowing of our views. Rather, it is a thumbnail sketch of history as experienced by most peoples of the world who have had the misfortune to come into contact with Europe and or white people. It is a history as we, the raped and pillaged, the bludgeoned and garroted, the starved and colonized victims of white power have experienced it. Anyone with a smidgen of objective intellectual capacity would understand that this is not an understanding that Hess could come up with on her own. Clearly, it is not she who is the author of my works. Rather, it has been the African People's Socialist Party's influence on Hess that has equipped her to write such an incredibly significant work. This book presents objective truth, something white people have great difficulty accepting when it comes to their relationship to the other oppressed peoples. This is because, generally speaking, white people live in a world created by and maintained off of the suffering and brutalization of the vast majority of the world's people. In the short term, white people benefit from this relationship immensely. This objective truth challenges the notion that white people are wealthier, healthier, and generally better off than the rest of the world because of some inherent genius of whites. For if it is the genius of whites that is responsible for the vast difference in conditions of existence of whites and others, then Europeans have no greater obligation or responsibility than that informed by their own sense of generosity. However, if it is true that white wealth has its origin in genocide, pillage, and brutality reinforced by the incredible institutional devices of today, including the prisons, the police, enforced poverty, then the implications are obviously very different. One shudders to think about the deep implications of this reality, so one doesn't. Hence, it is a rarity that we find whites capable of dealing with objective truth. There is a stake in falsifying history, in covering up objective truth. On the other hand, the slave, the colonized, the oppressed and despised African must know the truth. Unlike the case of the oppressor nation, which experiences some interest in disgusting or falsifying truth, the oppressed nation must know objective truth as a condition for liberation. Hess has been able to write this book because she has learned to see the world through the eyes of the oppressed, of the enslaved, colonized African. She has done this not through, quote, unlearning her racism, end quote, or some other idealist fantasy, which has no real bearing on the real world. Rather, she has leapt into the fray under the leadership of the African Revolution by understanding, as Che Guevara did, that it is not about well-wishing, but about sharing the same fate, whether in victory or in death. Obviously, Penny Hess is not colonized, and hence cannot share the same fate as we in absolute terms. But she can and has relinquished all claims to a world built on the labor and resources of the enslaved masses of the world. And, unlike most white people of the United States and Europe, she has come to terms with the fact that the foundation of European wealth and civilization is the resources and genius of Africa and the colonized world. Moreover, Penny Hess has made it her profession to turn the world right side up by uniting in absolute terms with the objectives of the African liberation movement. The leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement is what has made this possible for Hess, just as it makes it possible for many others like us, of us. I am profoundly proud of this book and my relationship to it. I will be flattered if my detractors get the authorship of this work confused with me. And that was the foreword of the book, Overturning the Culture of Violence, and this was written by Penny Hess, and that foreword was written by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Chairman of the African People's Socialist Party. Great. So we're going to go into the introduction here. Check. All right, this is great. I love reading aloud. I hope everyone's doing really well out there, and I just am so grateful to all the comrades and to all the white people, the European North Americans that are really standing up and taking a stance and uniting in material solidarity with the African People's Socialist Party. It's the vanguard, the advanced detachment of the African Revolution. We'll talk a little bit more about a few things to come that you should have on your calendar, but we'll start with this here. We'll read into a few chapters. I have you here for an hour, so. All right, introduction. Uhuru means freedom. And Overturning the Culture of Violence is not a, quote, objective book. It represents the biased point of view that there must be justice for those so long enslaved, colonized, victimized by genocide and oppression. The ideological foundations of this book are the political, yet very human, theories and perceptions of Omali Yeshitela, chairman of the African People's Socialist Party and leader of the Uhuru movement. In the process of spending most of his life actively engaged in struggle for the liberation of African people, Chairman Yeshitela has formulated an analysis of the world. Because his work represents such a dramatic advance over earlier Eurocentric political theories, the Uhuru movement calls his analysis Yeshitelism. This theory systematizes the worldview of oppressed peoples, forging it into a cogent tool in the struggle for freedom. With this theoretical basis, Overturning the Culture of Violence looks at history through the eyes of those whose lives, land, culture, and resources were and are plundered for the benefit of white society. Yeshitela often speaks of turning the world right side up. Indeed, even maps have historically been positioned from the standpoint of Europeans. Hence, the use of the map turned, quote, right side up, shown on the title page. Title page. Yes, right here. Can you see that? There's a map, and it's turned right side up. All right. In this book, we are attempting in particular to reach white people who, like myself, are interested in understanding this standpoint, so different from our own, which represents the experiences of the majority of humankind. Overturning the Culture of Violence unearths the bitter truth about the part played by white people from all strata of our society in the enslavement and genocide of colonized peoples. The book delineates our historic role as passive or active enforcers of the culture of violence, a role that has had very lucrative consequences for the American social system, as well as for us, the beneficiaries of white power. The information on these pages may at times be painful, wrenching, even overwhelming, as it certainly was to research and write. As much as possible, we soften no blows and cover over none of the reality. As white people, we feel that it is our responsibility to go deeply into the crimes and complicity of white society as part of the process of making reparations and a self-criticism to African people and the majority of humanity. Overturning the Culture of Violence tries to chip away our long-held assumptions. It challenges the fact that we are able to abide on tree-lined streets with our cats, dogs, and appropriate numbers of children, with our vacations, benefits, and experience of democracy, while most of the world is suffering in poverty, misery, and political terror. On these pages, we demonstrate Yeshitela's point that there is a dynamic relationship between the two experiences, a dialectic between the wealth of a few and the poverty of many, the well-being of white people and suffering of most other peoples. This is the overriding theme of the book. We hope that by looking honestly at the truth, we can begin to take responsibility for our brutal history and move towards an equitable future for all who share this planet. Though challenging, this book is at the same time hopeful and optimistic, offering a vision presented by African people of a world in which justice and peace prevail. There is a place for us in this new world, a place that opens up as we take on the task of righting the historical wrong. Omali Yeshitela and the Uhuru movement. Every understanding, insight, overview, and perception that might be found in this book comes from Omali Yeshitela. There is really nothing on these pages that generates originally from the author, nor could it. As white people sitting on the pedestal of the oppression of others, these are conclusions to which we could never come on our own. It is possible, however, for us to open our minds and spirits and embrace this worldview shared by the vast majority of humanity. By doing so, we begin to experience for the first time a commonality with the rest of the world, a unity that releases us from the fears, xenophobia, violence, and alienation which characterize white society. Yeshitela's theory poses the very simple question: why shouldn't African and oppressed peoples be free? Why shouldn't they control their homelands, resources, cultures, and destinies without economic, political, and armed intervention from the white power and white people? Why shouldn't they experience the economic and political benefits that we take for granted? These questions must be resolved if there is ever to be an end to war, an end to anger, and an end to violence in the world. Yeshitela begins from the premise that African people inside the United States are not the victims of, quote, racism. Rather, they constitute a nation of people colonized inside the borders of the United States. As such, black people are African people, wherever they are located in the world. The hyphenated attachment of American belies reality. Chairman Omali is a fully committed leader of African people everywhere. His theory is ascendant. His influence extends from the streets of Brooklyn to the continent of Africa and increasingly penetrates to every corner of the globe where oppressed peoples are struggling for freedom. A brilliant political strategist and charismatic orator, Omali Yeshitela has the ability to bring his profound theoretical analysis down to earth with wit, persuasion, and raw emotion. His consistently unique observations of white power are painted in a hilariously funny light one moment, while he brings the listener to tears with poignant descriptions of oppression the next. He has the rare ability to make white people laugh at our own arrogance and white nationalism. He radiates the optimistic African spirit and paints a vision for the possibilities of all humanity in the process of liberating Africa and her people. Years ago, Yeshitela adopted, quote, Uhuru for his slogan. The entire movement which he leads is now known by this Swahili word for freedom, popularized by the struggle of the Mau Mau in Kenya in the 1950s. The aim of the Uhuru movement is the liberation of African people in this country, in the African homeland, and wherever African people have ended up as a result of being kidnapped into slavery. In 1976, the African People's Socialist Party formed the African People's Solidarity Committee, of which Penny Hess is the chairwoman of. It's made up of white people whose mission is to organize solidarity with the struggle of African people from our own communities. Years of research for presentations at forums, teach-ins, and panel discussions geared at organizing other white people laid the basis for overturning the culture of violence. Moreover, nearly a quarter of a century of studying the books, articles, and speeches of Omali Yeshitela, as well as participation in numerous community campaigns directly under his leadership, prepared us for the task of writing this book. Located in Oakland, California, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Illinois, and St. Petersburg, Florida, the work of the African People's Solidarity Committee has long involved building a mass movement for raising funds and resources for the Uhuru movement as a means of white reparations to African people. The question of white reparations to African people has become the central focus of the work of the African People's Solidarity Committee over the years. Our dedication to reparations stems from the simple fact that the stolen resources of African and oppressed peoples are found in the white community and create the economic pedestal upon which our society sits. In Oakland and Philadelphia, APSC manages party institutions that function as a base of the Uhuru movement in white communities. These popular institutions include Uhuru concessions and Uhuru furniture stores. And an earlier version of this book was published in 1991 as Culture of Violence was the title. And much has taken place in the world since the publication of that original book, which was less than 200 pages long. During the past decade, the voice of the oppressed has grown stronger. The movements of African indigenous people have continued to expose, quote, the lies my teacher told us. No longer can the rape and crimes of slave masters like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington be hidden. No longer can Christopher Columbus be held up as anything other than an agent of genocide. Many new and excellent books have appeared during the 1990s, detailing much more of the true history as experienced by those who make up capitalism's pedestal. When we decided to reissue Culture of Violence in 1999, we felt that it needed some revision. In the process of revision, the book ended up being more than 600 pages long. And even then, we had to cut out enormous amounts of material. The result was a completely different entity which we named Overturning the Culture of Violence. The scope of this book encompasses ancient history up through the current situation today. With this enormous time frame, we can only present an overview and do not pretend to make a thorough and exacting study of history. There are many, many more past and present day events which could not have been included Sorry, let me say that over again. There are many, many more past and present day events which could have been included had we the time and the space. We consciously used easily accessible books for source materials for Overturning the Culture of Violence rather than scholarly and esoteric material. Thus, the information put forward here is available to most people in books found at libraries and bookstores. We have used many direct quotes because we felt it was important that certain points be made in the author's own words. We recommend that all the books listed in the bibliography be studied for their contributions to a more thorough understanding of the culture of violence. Chapter 1 takes a look at the greatness of African and indigenous civilizations prior to the European invasion. It gives a history of the European onslaught and the genocide, enslavement, and colonization of Africa and the Americas as the basis for the system of parasitic capitalism. It introduces the theory of Omali Yeshitela and points out the shortcomings of traditional left analysis based on Marxist-Leninism. The enthusiasm of Europeans for profound savagery toward other peoples is exposed. Chapter 2 continues on in the same vein with a focus on slavery and genocide in the United States. Chapter 3 deals with 20th century America, beginning with the Spanish-American War and on through the 1960s. It covers the Garvey movement and the civil rights and Black Power movements. Again, it looks at the opportunism of the white left and the violence and brutality of white people towards oppressed peoples. Chapter 4, 5, and 6 examine the U.S. government's counterinsurgency against the Black Power movement of the 1960s and against the African community as a whole. It attempts to provide data and a human face to back up Yeshitela's point that the conditions facing African people today are the consequence of a public policy stemming from this undeclared government war. The, quote, war without terms, end quote, inside the U.S. is put in the context of the U.S. foreign military policy of counterinsurgency against the liberation movements of oppressed peoples around the world. Producing a war economy, this counterinsurgency, both internationally and domestically, has proven to be economically beneficial for white society. Chapter 7 details the political situation in St. Petersburg, Florida, the national headquarters of the African People's Socialist Party. The Uhuru movement there has won a measure of political power for the African community since 1996, when the police murder of a young African motorist sparked rebellions. Chapter 8 raises the issue of reparations from white people to the African community and addresses our role and interest in contributing to the building of a new and just world. The Uhuru movement often uses the term, quote, North American for white people. The reader will find that although we mainly use the term, quote, white, since it is in, end quote, since it is in common usage, there are times when, quote, North American and, quote, European are used interchangeably. The African People's Socialist Party initiated the term, quote, North American to take the issue of white people out of the realm of racism, the ideas in our heads. The use of this term does not imply that we have any claims to this land stolen from the indigenous people. Rather, the term North American makes the issue of our political, economic, and social relationship to the capitalist system and U.S. government on the one hand, and to the African people on the other. We have used materials from many sources, including from the books of Ward Churchill. The African People's Socialist Party and the African People's Solidarity Committee recognize that struggles revolving around Ward Churchill are currently taking place inside the American Indian movement. The Uhuru movement affirms that our use of his research in no way indicates a position in those struggles. The African People's Socialist Party asserts its complete unity with the right of the indigenous people to regain their stolen land and resources and to define their struggle for self-determination and sovereignty as they see fit. The party has demonstrated its solidarity with the liberation of native peoples throughout the years and in no way wants to intervene in the internal struggles of that movement. However, we made the decision to use certain books by Churchill just as we would any other source, simply because some of them contain pertinent information which contribute to the overall understandings of this book. We hope that this book will provide the reader with a new approach to the world. We see Overturning the Culture of Violence as a journey embarked upon by a traveler with an open mind and honest spirit. It takes us from genocide to liberation, from oppression to reparations. For North Americans, it gives us a picture of what we must do to rectify our relationship with African people. It provides us with a way to understand that true solidarity with the struggles of oppressed peoples is the only path to a viable future for all humankind. We want to thank all the comrades and friends who contributed resources, time, and real commitment to the production of this book. We hope that with the next edition of this book, we can provide a more thorough index. And then it goes on to give information about the African People's Socialist Party, visiting the website at ahurusolidarity.org. This is Chapter 1, The Inescapable Dialectic. And this is a quote by Omali Yeshitela. There is an inescapable dialectic, a unity of opposites to be found in the emergence of Euro-Americans as the subjects of history and Africans and others becoming its objects. Clearly, there is an inescapable relationship between the great wealth of the, quote, white world and the impoverishment of the rest of us upon whose backs the entire intricate capitalist edifice and capitalist activity rest with ever-growing anxiety. African life along the Nile is depicted in the beautiful paintings of Thebes, in parentheses, modern-day Luxor, Egypt, created by skillful artists some 3,500 years ago, portrayed as the daily reality of a society that unraveled the mysteries of astronomy, probed the realm of higher mathematics, and left us an enduring legacy of splendid architecture. It is a harmonious life that is shown warmly social, close to nature, collectivist and free from want. Enriched with music, the arts and science, we see a society capable of fulfilling the material, spiritual and creative needs of its people. These paintings reveal lush gardens with trees and multicolored flowers, fish ponds, birds, and lotus blossoms. In this setting, the homework of school children is being corrected. Artists are at work. Magistrates sit on their benches. A girl pauses while gleaning grain, and someone's hair is being braided outdoors in an open meadow. A goldsmith is putting the finishing touches on beautiful jewelry. A gardener is planting, and craftsmen are making furniture. Men and women are celebrating around a banquet table, entertained by musicians and dancers. Representative of human culture prior to the European onslaught, these paintings, at once magnificent and simple, provide a glimpse into a past and perhaps future world. There is much to be gained by studying a society in which oppression, prisons, hunger, and homelessness were non-existent. We North Americans, however, are often complacently indifferent to history. Its lessons are lost on us. We tend to see ourselves as the center of the universe, and our ignorance of convenience serves us well. The less we know, the easier it is to never question our place in the world. We carefully cherish our denial about the fact that our lives are built on the suffering of so many others. Now, at the start of a new millennium, things are changing. The voice of the enslaved is rising to new authority as the people of the colonies strive to regain power over their stolen land, resources, and destinies. The strength of this voice has begun to force us from the white community to question the, quote, lies my teacher told me, and to unmask the fabrications that make up the myths of white power. This book is an attempt to help us open the door that many have preferred for so long to keep shut. It lets us see the world from the point of view of African people and all those whom we have treated as nameless objects of history. It is an attempt to understand the past in order to begin to play a part in the inevitable transformations of a future shaped by the hands of those who are now enslaved. Overturning the Culture of Violence came about as the result of years of participation in the African People's Solidarity Committee, APSC, formed by the African People's Socialist Party, APSP. An APSC is composed of white people who organize in our communities under the leadership of the Black-led Uhuru movement. This book is based on research and lectures directed at other North Americans as part of the process of building solidarity with the movement for African liberation. All the understandings on these pages derive directly from the theoretical, political, and human vision of the party's chairman, Omali Yeshitela, who has, in effect, codified the worldview of the oppressed in this era. His theory is known as Yeshitelism. There are no conclusions, no insights in this book that we, as white people, could have come to on our own, no matter how astute our perceptions, thorough our research, or Marxist our spectacles, as one African scholar put it. Our perspective on the backs of other peoples would never permit us to comprehend the experience of the oppressed majority of humankind, past and present, whose lives, resources, and civilizations have provided the fuel for the Western imperialist engines. It took the clarity and wisdom of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African working class to inform us. The Uhuru movement has opened itself up to white people who are interested in taking responsibility to rectify the past in the process of building a just world for tomorrow. To the extent that we, as the beneficiaries of white power, can unite with this vision and rise to its tasks, we are able to enter into the embrace of humanity instead of being its policeman, executioner, exploiter, and slave driver. This book is an attempt to help turn the world right side up, as Omali Yeshitela says. It is an invitation for the reader to walk through that door to examine the world as it really is, rather than as we would like it to be. As we break our bonds with white power, we can truly join the world community. It is not always an easy process, for we carry on our shoulders the accumulated assumptions of generations that have lived on imperialism's pedestal, but it is profoundly fulfilling. Perhaps we could say this is the price of our redemption. For thousands of years before an Italian ex-slave trader and mercenary named Christopher Columbus sailed to the Caribbean, financed by the Spanish crown, world trade, culture, and civilization. Let me start that over. For thousands of years before an Italian ex-slave trader and mercenary named Christopher Columbus sailed to the Caribbean, financed by the Spanish crown, world trade, culture and civilization flourished. By 1492, Portugal had already been attacking Africa for a century or more, stealing human beings and extracting vast amounts of gold. It was the Portuguese king who told Columbus that, quote, boats had been found which started out from Guinea and navigated to the west, to the Americas with merchandise. Since ancient times, well-traveled trade routes over land and sea provided the means for the interchange of commodities and ideas among African, Arabic, and Asian peoples. Evidence long suppressed by Europeans also proves that African people regularly sailed to the Americas hundreds, indeed thousands of years ago. From time immemorial, these long-standing spice and silk routes enabled Africans in Timbuktu, Mali, for example, to be linked with other cosmopolitan world centers in northern Africa, the Persian Gulf, Constantinople, India, and China. Trade winds and ocean currents to Asia and the Americas created water routes used since antiquity by African mariners. Widely diverse civilizations were thus connected in this way. Gold, salt, silk, spices, oils, and precious stones were disseminated in addition to philosophical and scientific advancements. It was along these routes that the Swahili people in southeastern Africa shipped an elephant to the court of the Emperor of China nearly 1,000 years ago, and African secrets of building pyramids and mummifying the dead were taken to the peoples of Central America as long ago as 850 BC. One book notes, quote, the fact that the banana, which seems to derive from Asia, had reached West Africa before the Europeans suggests an international interconnection of great range, end quote. For millennia, humanity participated in world commerce, enjoyed by all, controlled by none. Isolated from the global interchange between sophisticated cultures in Africa and other parts of the world, Europe, for all practical purposes, did not exist. What is today known as Europe was made up of warring tribes alienated from the rest of the human race and desperately competing for scarce resources on cold, barren lands. While Africa enjoyed advanced civilization, Europeans still lived in caves. Notoriously impoverished and ignorant, nomadic European clans from the forests of the north wreaked destruction and violence at every turn. Far from being civilized, the reputation of these early Europeans gave us negative and antisocial concepts still in use today, such as vandalism and barbarity. The emergence of Southern European cultures along the Mediterranean came about because of their proximity to Africa. Ancient Greece and Rome were directly attributable to the much more ancient African civilization of Egypt, which had been the dominant political and intellectual force in the world for more than 4,000 years. A conscious European identity only manifested itself far later with the advent of slavery and colonialism, which created a world economy benefiting Europe at the expense of everyone else. The African historian Hosea Jaff explains in his book, A History of Africa, before capitalist colonialism, there was no Europe, only a collection of feudal, mercantile, and tribal towns, farms, villages, discrete states and kingdoms vying and warring with each other. When Europe became connected with and dependent on first Africa, then the Americas, and finally Asia, it began to become a reality and idea. Only when Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, Dutch, English, German, Danish, and Swedish confronted and clashed with Africa, America, and Asia did the need arise for them to consider themselves as a set, a whole, different from, hostile to, and, eventually, superior to Africans, Americans, and Asians. Colonialism gave them a common interest. Africa is unquestionably the birthplace of civilization and humanity itself. Its glorious history dates back tens of thousands of years and includes, but did not begin with, the great civilization of ancient Egypt. Africa is splendid, and it is huge, nearly 11.7 million square miles. All of Europe, India, China, and the United States could fit within its borders. The late African scholar W.E.B. Du Bois describes it very poetically. Africa is a beautiful land, not merely comely and pleasant, but haunted with swamp and jungle, sternly beautiful in its loveliness of terror, its depth of gloom, and fullness of color, its heaven-tearing peaks, its silver of endless sand, the might, width, and breadth of its rivers, depth of its lakes, and height of its hot, blue heaven. There are myriads of living things, the voice of storm, the kiss of pestilence and pain, old and ever new and incredibly ancient. Warm in climate and abundant in food and natural resources, the life-giving environment of Africa was conducive to the early rise of civilizations. Somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago, it seemed that man in Africa became a regular user of fire. And that was said by Howard University professor Joseph E. Harris in Africans and Their History. African civilization arose in the valley of the Nile River, which flows north for 4,160 miles, more than half the length of Africa, into the Mediterranean. It was in the fertile Nile Valley that agriculture was developed and iron tools were first wrought. The late brilliant African scholar Cheikh Anta Diop places the earliest beginnings of Egyptian civilization at 17,000 BC, when African society developed in the cradle of the Upper Nile and slowly descended to spread out along the Mediterranean basin. By 7000 BC, Africans had domesticated animals and developed agriculture, growing rice, corn, sorghum, and yams in several parts of the continent. Africans in Egypt first set a calendar in 4241 BC. In the most ancient of times, Africans had musical instruments, chairs, beds, jewelry, and art, as well as advanced concepts of science and technology, including architecture, astronomy, and mathematics. Attesting to the great age and breadth of African civilizations, Diop wrote, From the appearance of Homo sapiens, from earliest prehistory until our time, we are able to trace our origins as a people without significant breaks in continuity. In early prehistory, a great south-north movement brought the African peoples of the Great Lakes region into the Nile Basin. They lived there in clusters for millennia. Characteristically democratic, these first African civilizations were governed by constitutions and a, quote, people's council on which the various social strata were represented, end quote. These states were each headed by a leader whose, quote, mission was to serve the people wisely, and his authority depended on his respect for the established constitution, end quote. Throughout his writings, I hope I'm saying his name right, Cheikh Anta Diop demonstrated the cohesive cultural and linguistic legacy of African civilizations, a legacy that continued through centuries. Egypt was one of the most brilliant and influential of African civilizations, but there were many other remarkable African states which were unique, yet notably similar. Nubia, with its ports on the Red Sea, was one such example. Like Egypt, Nubia, now the Sudan, was a bustling hub that attracted people from southern Africa as well as the Middle East and Asia. Both Egypt and Nubia emerged as viable economic, political, and cultural centers in northeastern Africa, with links to other regions of the continent, writes Professor Harris in Africans and Their History. The kingdom of Kush on the Blue Nile was urban, materially advanced, literate, and existed in the interior of the continent for about 1,000 years, with dynamic relations not only with its immediate neighbors, but, through trade, with an international community. Axum, or Ethiopia, was a wealthy cosmopolis, which included residents from Egypt, the Eastern Roman Empire, Persia, and India. The Ethiopians developed their own written language and became skilled architects and builders in stone, as well as producers of bronze, silver, and gold coins. Egypt and Ethiopia were the first countries in the world to have been ruled by women. Hatshepsut, who reigned for 20 years, during Egypt's New Kingdom, and Ethiopia's legendary Queen of Sheba, are remembered by history as powerful leaders. African societies in other parts of the continent also became as powerful creators and traders. Carthage, modern-day Tunisia, in the north, and Ghana, Mali, and Songhai in West Africa were long-standing African civilizations which, though they emerged later, continue to carry Egypt's cultural heritage. On the eastern coast, south of the Horn, Africans have engaged in commerce and trade with India, China, and other parts of Asia since ancient times. Ivory, gums, shells, copper, leopard skin, gold, and many other commodities have been exported from this area for millennia. It was here that the civilization of Zimbabwe grew up, and its medieval ruins of enormous stone walls, built skillfully without mortar, draw tourists from around the world today. Distortion of history. European historians have long falsified African history in order to justify slavery, colonialism, and the plunder of Africa. I just want to read that again. European historians have long falsified African history in order to justify slavery, colonialism, and the plunder of Africa. A speaker from Zimbabwe's liberation movement of the 1970s once told an American audience that the British colonial school system taught him the magnificent stone walls found in his country were built by Vikings. White archaeologists and Egyptologists not only attack Africa ideologically in typical colonial fashion, they routinely loot Africa of its great artistic treasures. Consequently, any serious African art historian must go to London or Paris or New York to see the masterpieces of his or her own people. Reparations. All of you art museums and just so sad. Return all the stolen wealth, please. Thank you. When the British colonial grave robber Lord Carnarvon opened and desecrated the tomb of Egyptian king Tutankhamun in 1922, Tutankhamun in 1922, he crudely remarked in a letter, quote, "There is enough stuff to fill the whole upstairs Egyptian section of the British Museum. I imagine it is the greatest find ever made." British Museum, you owe reparations to Africans. Return the stolen wealth. In an effort to wipe out the truth about the magnificence and integrity of African history, Europeans separate Egypt from Africa and propagate the ridiculous myth that the ancient Egyptians were white. Despite the fact that even the briefest look at Egyptian statues and paintings in museums reveals them to be unmistakably African, Europeans have gone to great lengths to maintain this lie. I'm just going to read a couple more paragraphs and then I'm going to announce a few things that are upcoming, and I'll just continue reading this on a later show. It's just so good. One cannot help noting, while walking through the stolen Egyptian exhibit in the British Museum, that the noses of so many of the busts and statues are missing. Legend has it that Napoleon shot off the noses of many figures, including the Sphinx, when he invaded Egypt in 1798. No one was to know that the legacy of ancient Egypt, with all its wonders, was irrefutably African, not European. While Europe tries to claim that Egypt was somehow part of the white world, in reality, European scientific, artistic, philosophical, theological, and even technological understandings derive from African civilization. Ancient Greece and Rome, upheld by Europeans as the apex of civilization, invaded, sacked, burned, and looted Egypt for all its science, agriculture, and wealth. Europeans didn't just, quote, adopt or, quote, annex African ideas. Without the stolen intellectual, artistic, and economic foundation of African Egypt, there could have been no Roman or Hellenistic cultures in Europe. Egypt was undeniably black. Anta Diop has set the record straight, saying, "The Egyptians were Negroes. The moral fruit of their civilization is to be counted among the assets of the black world. Instead of presenting itself to history as an insolvent debtor, the black world is the very initiator of the Western civilization, flaunted before our eyes today. Pythagorean mathematics, the theory of the four elements of Tales of Miletus, Epicurean materialism, Platonic idealism, Judaism, Islam, and modern science are rooted in Egyptian cosmogony and science. To his great surprise and satisfaction, the African will discover that most of the ideas used today to domesticate, atrophy, dissolve, or steal his soul were conceived by his own ancestors." So I have 10 minutes left, and I'm going to stop right there to make a few announcements. But I will totally pick up where I left off, and I highly recommend going to theburningspear.com/marketplace and buying your own copy of this book and reading it yourself. And also, while you're at it, get a subscription of The Burning Spear. And while you're at it, buy Uneasy Equilibrium. And while you are at it, mark on your calendar, Vanguard, the advanced detachment of the African Revolution. It is the African People's Socialist Party's 7th Congress is coming up, and it's from October 6th through to the 13th. And there's so much work to do. And it's so exciting, and I'm just so honored to not only have been able to go to plenary and convention, but the 7th Congress I'll be able to go this year. For those of you that cannot make it October 6th through the 13th, you can still go online and you can sponsor. There are sponsorship packages, and you can go online and you can buy a sponsorship package and help someone get here from Africa, help just with travel costs. People are going to be coming in from all over the world, and well, it's not many people. There are people out there struggling to just survive. So it'd be nice if you have some extra capital, share it along, pay reparations by buying a sponsorship package. And for those local businesses in Somerville and Union Square area, you'll be seeing me soon, knocking at your door, because I'm going to be seeing if local businesses want to buy ad space in the pamphlet that the African People's Socialist Party 7th Congress is going to be handing out to all of its attendees, and that's very exciting. What else is coming up? There is Somerville Media Center is having a telethon in June. We're trying to raise some capital ourselves here at the television studio. It's such an incredible asset to the community, just providing a platform and all the tools one needs to get their message out there to the world. All right. Well, let's see, we got some time. What's happening in St. Louis, in the O'Fallon district of St. Louis, with the Black Power blueprint is truly awe-inspiring. Having had the honor to listen to Chairman Omali, to hear Chairman Omali Yeshitela speak, and to hear Deputy Chair Ona Zane, and to see the work that's gone into that project and that continues to go into it, it just blows you away. It's like, it gives me chills talking about it. The Uhuru House, to be in the Uhuru House, to touch the walls. I mean, wow, that is truly, Omali, Chairman Omali Yeshitela says it is breathtakingly historic, the stance that the white people have taken in showing material solidarity by paying reparations and helping to build economic development and self-determination in these black communities that, as I said earlier, have been sabotaged politically and economically for a long time. And if you want to just do right, if you want to see the end, if you want to overturn the culture of violence, pay reparations, help build the African People's Socialist Party, you know. If you're white, please join Uhuru Solidarity Movement. It is really, it's an organization that is truly revolutionary and unlike anything that exists today. And so I'm just so honored. Thank you all, comrades, Uhuru, it's good to see you all. If you're in the Boston, Somerville, Cambridge area and you're interested in knowing more about what we do and want to be a part in organizing, you can come to meetings. We have chapter meetings at the Boston Public Library every Monday from beginning at 7, going till about 8 or 9. I believe it's either 6 or 7, but it's all online, and you can check that out. Uhuru Solidarity Movement /Boston. What else is coming up? Just the liberation of all oppressed people. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope that wherever you are, you're just taking good care of yourself and you're doing the work to help lift, one another up. It's important. And that's it. I'm going to go take a nap. Thanks again, everyone. And again, Fallon's Daily Toast will be airing every week from 6 to 7 instead of 7 to 8. And I highly suggest, if you're watching on Facebook, check out tonight's Uhuru Solidarity Movement webinar. Bobby Wittenberg will be on to talk about what it's like. He was in the Marines, and he's just so vocal. And he's also a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and pays reparations. And he'll be on to talk about his experience. And it's something everybody should tune into. Go to the Uhuru Solidarity Movement page. Tune in. I'll share it on my page. It's just going to be it's good, Good stuff. Let's see, what else was I going to say? Oh, yes. See right now on the back of this here computer? For those of you that want to pay reparations and you want to have fun and you want to, there's something called the Reparations Challenge. There have been people that have given cooking demonstrations, that have been yoga for reparations. So people host events, they, teach, build, do any, and all the money raised goes right to the African People's Education and Defense Fund, right into Black Star Industries to help, the Jico Kitchen in St. Louis. I got a tour and it's beautiful, but it needs so much work, something like $300,000. So that's the goal. Like, let's raise $300,000. That's the goal. And so you can do reparations challenges. If you're an artist and you want to contribute art to our Etsy page, go to Art for Reparations, Etsy.com. And, email, reach out. We'll get you in direct connect with the people that are handling all of that. And you can give your art, and the sale of your work goes toward reparations. It's just beautiful. Everything's been set up. If you have a birthday coming up, there's this cool feature on Facebook now, that you can have people provide money to an organization of your choosing. Have it be the African People's Education and Defense Fund or the Black Power Blueprint. There's just so many ways that we can help to raise the resources. so that this project is builds and grows. And you know, I'd love to see Jiko kitchens and Uhuru houses all over the country. I really would. So that is it. Again, I salute leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Deputy Chair Oda Zane, all the comrades doing all the good work. You know, I salute you so much for that. And until we all meet again, Uhuru.